Like to call the Real Estate Committee meeting for Plaquemines Parish Council to order at June 19th, 2021 at 9:18. Machines open for roll call. Let the record show Councilman LaFrance and Conovich are present. Get everybody to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to thank everyone for coming. New business, nomination, and vote for committee chair and vice chair.
I don't think you can do that today.
No, so we'll pass over that. Discussion about available parish property. You can come up here if you want.
Do we have a list of the properties?
He has one of just a,
You're calling me.
he has one just of properties from the air base up here. Like I told him on the phone, I got probably 6 pieces of property down the road that people want to buy already. And I'll put the list together with the addresses and all. That way we could pass them as surplus property to get them sold.
This is part of a much larger list, but this was the list that Mr. Espadron gave us initially.
Who did?
Espadron, he was the Director of Economic Development.
All
Okay.
right, Keith.
Keith, and he gave us that list. That's what he asked us to focus on. So those are the ones that we focused on.
If you could go back so they could get you on the mic.
Also, do you have another copy of that?
Yes, we'll
And after, can you state y'all names and who y'all represent and all for the record?
Thank you so much.
introduce yourself. Yes, okay. Let me get this last list. Good morning. My name is Paul Richard. I'm with Ladder and Bloom, and this is, go ahead.
I'm Lars Peterson, also with Ladder and Bloom.
We are the team handling the real estate for Plaquemines Parish.
Thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
Can you go over what you know about it and what they've told you? And
Yeah. Let me pull the list. Let me get my-
What are you looking
I'm looking for my other list. All right. When we came on board, Keith Espadron asked us to take a look at this particular list that you see. He yellowed this, the yellows is the list that he made. So we looked at all of these. We also did, he asked us to look at the Popich Building. And if you recall, in September, George Hero, who was with Mathis Briere, did a study, an updated study of one he did post-Katrina on the building. So I think we have copies of that if you like that just speak to what's the condition of the building currently, what are the issues that need to be addressed. So we looked at that. We also looked at the government complex. Keith asked us to take a look at the government complex. So we essentially toured all of the buildings in the complex itself. You have about 400,000 square feet of buildings in the government complex. The parish essentially is in about 100 to 125,000 currently. We also looked at all the buildings near the tomato shed, everything on Main Street, things like that. We also looked at the two buildings. They're on Avenue A. They're referred to on the list as the Pivac buildings. Those are the two houses that are kind of at the end of the road that are in the flight path for Callender or the Joint Reserve Base. I always refer to it as Callender. And then they asked us to take a look at Port Eads. So we took a trip with Lars and I and Todd, took a trip to Port Eads about a month ago and went into the buildings, toured them, took a look at essentially tried to do an assessment of damage. That's not what we do, but just generally speaking, how easy or hard it would be to lease that facility now. And then we worked with Rennie just a little bit on the adjudicated properties in the parish of Plaquemines. He gave us a list. It's a huge list, and there's about 200 properties that are on the parish's adjudicated list that could potentially be sold. Of course, when you do adjudicated properties, as you know, there's a redemption period, and an individual has three years to essentially redeem the property for back taxes. The bulk of the list is properties that exist within the Bohemia Spillway, so that was that. We've had maybe 3 calls unsolicited from folks who said they would like to buy a particular piece of property. So it was also I mentioned this, we also work with the Tulane School of Architecture. They have a master's program in real estate and sustainable development. So there was a team from Tulane that came out and walked with us through all the buildings, really from the standpoint of just trying to understand what you have here, because I think that at some point the parish has to make a decision about the complex, because at one point you did entertainment, if you recall, the Hogs for the Cause, and did a nice job of, other than the rain, of course, did a nice job of laying out what would essentially be a festival ground. And at the same time, you're adding more sports and recreation facilities. So the parish is going to have to, I think the parish needs to decide what it wants to do with the remainder of the land. And then the biggest challenge that we see with the government complex, the complex of buildings here, is the expense related to repairing any of the buildings. I mean, currently, there are no buildings on these grounds that you could potentially lease to the private sector without doing some serious renovation. And I think the example of the Emergency Operations Center and what it's going through in the bid process and what it would cost to harden that facility and to move them out of the Popich building into their building, I think I understand it was somewhere between $1 million to $1.5 million. So you've got a lot of buildings on this site that have potential. The challenge, of course, is going to be if you're going to offer it to the public or the private sector, have to figure out how to pay for the repairs on some of these. So we pretty much have I think a good feel for at least the list that they asked us to look at. What is the situation here with the government complex? And then I think, and of course, Port Eads. So I think the next step is to make some decisions about what is surplus, and on particularly some of the buildings that say the clerk's building, all the buildings around the tomato shed and things along Edward Hebert Boulevard. You can declare a lot of these surplus, but you don't have to sell or lease them, but you have the potential at some point to lease or sell them. So I think what's going to be important is for the real estate committee to decide what it would like to do in terms of buildings that you're not using that are clearly surplus, and how you would like to proceed on that.
Let me ask you a question. You said that when you was doing a walkthrough, that you had Tulane with you.
Right.
Did Tulane do a walkthrough when y'all went to Port Eads?
No, because that's not in their kind of scope of their program. And this was basically one of the professors and one student. So we were trying to get Tulane to, because they do this with a lot of communities where they will take a whole class and use it as a class project. So I was trying to get Tulane to consider doing that for the government complex, meaning, I mean, the buildings are already inventoried. What's important is which buildings within that inventory would be the easiest to repair and fix and make available for lease to the general public.
The reason why I asked you that question, because I was wondering whether or not Tulane would be interested in using Port Eads as a resource facility.
Research facility?
Research facility, since it's right next to the Gulf of Mexico.
That's a good question. I've only dealt with the School of Architecture, so, I mean, I know they have a School of Environmental Science and things like that. That's certainly a question we can ask.
I appreciate it if you would.
Sure, absolutely. No question.
Every school, just put it out, see if
Yeah,
they
see.
want it. NOAA,
Yeah,
Unless you, anyone.
the Lumpkin, there's a CIPRA, there's a whole, the whole number of agencies that could potentially use it. It's just a question of asking and seeing if that's the case. Now, as I was talking to Mark just before the meeting started, speaking to Port Eads, unsolicited, we've had 3 operators who have contacted us interested in leasing the facility for the purposes of fishing charters, things like that. So the former tenant and 2 newer tenants, or not newer, just 2 other entities that have an interest. So in addition to what you were talking about in terms of any various agencies that might have an interest in research out of there, we have 3 entities that are interested in leasing the facility. So,
And you wouldn't have an idea how much it would cost to get that facility up to speed.
no, I don't. We walked through the property. There obviously was some damage. We went through the interior, and I took photos of everything on the interior. There were a couple places where there's some mold, but it's not widespread. Like after Katrina, the whole house would be full of mold. It's in specific areas. I would think all of the mechanical is gone, particularly anything that was on the outside. If it wasn't damaged by Ida, it was stripped as usual. And it looks like, I hate to hazard a guess. I think it would be great if you could get one of your engineers down there to do a quick assessment. That would be helpful.
The shell is good.
Pull up that mic over there. Yeah, the shell is great. I mean, I tell you what, that is a well-built facility. There's absolutely no question that's a well-built facility.
Behind $14-15 million.
Yeah.
Imagine so.
Yeah, obviously. And
I was going to get back to the government complex and
okay, well, let me finish up, if you don't mind. Let me just finish the thought on Port Eads, and that would be, because we were talking about it before the meeting started, the possibility of offering it for lease, doing a bid to get interest in, particularly the 3 that are already indicated interest, to see if they would be willing to proceed on a basis of you take it as is, where is, and you do all the improvements. Now, sometimes you have to do some adjustments with rent if they're going to put up all the money to repair the buildings, but that's an approach that we could consider. So, just a thought.
I know members of the council told the administration about the complex already. The property, we didn't make any money for the hogs or the cause. So we told them to put it out for bid if a hotel wants to come
Sure.
or a restaurant wants to come lease
Yeah.
a piece of property, we do that, because with a quadplex, if you go to other communities
Oh,
that
yeah.
have them, it's numerous quads.
Yes.
Hotels next door, restaurants next door, those people don't leave that area.
Yeah, particularly for baseball and soccer. Those are two big sports today. And if I'm not mistaken, Jefferson Parish is looking at doing, not only in Jefferson Parish, but New Orleans East at the old Six Flags site, they're looking at doing a quad, but for soccer as opposed to baseball. So that's definitely a possibility. The challenge, of course, is you have a lot of land here. I mean, it's a bunch of land. And when you're looking at a path toward development, it's always best to have a strategic plan for development so you don't, it doesn't become helter-skelter. And I think, I agree with you, there's a lot we could do here, but I suspect we probably need someone, an architect or land planner, just to take a look at what's here and make some suggestions about, if you're going to do sports, is it in the rear? The two corners in the front along F. Abear Boulevard are very, very valuable in terms of what you're talking about, hotel, shopping, things like that. So you just have to, I think the council and the parish is going to have to decide what it wants this to be.
You think property on that road's a moneymaker?
I think it can be, but before someone spends multiple $1 million to do a development, they're going to want to know what the rest of the property is going to be. So you don't want to build into something where, you got a sports complex immediately adjacent, or you're not going to ever allow a use that would deter
I just brought that up because we could have bought across the street for
I know,
nothing, and
I had talked to the administration about that, and then I think it was, the challenge, of course, you had to have money to do it. And I believe the final bid on that property was about $750,000, if I'm
we
not
could have got it
mistaken.
for 300.
Man,
We had BP money still, so.
oh,
But nobody has the
The foresight.
foresight to see.
yeah,
Wally Pontiff wanted to build quadplexes back here, but the parish at the time didn't let him. Now we wanting to do it. And
right.
Like I said, you go anywhere else what had
No,
quads, it's not just one quad, it's, might have 10 quads.
Oh, yeah. Well, my kids played travel soccer all throughout elementary and high school, and I agree with you. We'd go to a community for a weekend. That's 2 hotel room nights. You had to eat at someplace. I mean, you'd spend quite a bit of money as a function of those tournaments.
Because it
So-
was brought up here, they could drop their kids off and they could go fishing, they could go to the French Quarter. People that do that ain't leaving their kids.
No, they're definitely not going to leave their kids. Not today.
Especially today.
Yes. Safety is a huge factor today. So
Mr.
I don't think the mic is on.
Mike, Kim?
The mic is not on.
I'm sorry. No, hold on. There.
Got it on, Kim? Thank you. Thank you, Donald Valley. First off, I've listened to the council now for several years talking about what property it owns, or the parish owns, and what to do with it. We have multitude of different types of property, and every one of them fits in a different category. Probably about 4 or 5 different categories. The first issue I think the parish needs to recognize is that it shouldn't think about selling any piece of property unless it's just absolutely not necessary. It's hard to replace a piece of property down the road. I think we need to identify all the properties that we have throughout the entire parish, any leases that are on them, look at the evaluation, if there is, on these properties, and then make a determination, is it useful to the parish in its 5 or 10-year plan from now, where it could fit back in. Granted, the government complex is something that could be done. As you know, I bid on that piece of property across the street because I thought it was a valuable piece of property. I think it's probably worth about $1.5 million. I think we stopped bidding around $500,000. However, that's not to say that the government complex is one that ought to be developed right now. It takes a lot of money to develop it because the buildings are in terrible condition. I think what we first need to identify, and I think we've heard Benny talk about it in the past, and some people say, let's sell it, but I don't think you ought to sell your piece of property. I think you need to identify every piece of property you have that can bring in a maximum rent to you, or lease that you can bring it back with the least amount of dollars and take care of the low-hanging fruit first. I think they need to identify and recommend to you all what's there. from that aspect of it, you can take all the pieces of property that were taken back either through tax adjudication or from the LRA program, develop a separate program like we did before, lot next door, different things, and a method of which you can dispose of those properties separate from the other properties that you own, because you don't need tax adjudicated properties. I know Orleans Parish, Jefferson, a few of them would use a company called Civic Source, and you may want to look into them. They do an excellent job of disposing of the properties, complying with the state laws, as well as the adjudication, as well as the recapture of those properties over a period of time. And there's some rights in Louisiana about property laws, that people get to reclaim their properties. These people know what they're doing, okay, and they charge a fee. That could take care of those properties that you have and disposal of it. It's not going to make you a lot of money, but it will be something you don't have to maintain. The biggest problem is you got to cut the grass on all those properties. When I was on the LNT board, you know how to work a lawnmower, Mr. Chairman.
Some people, we ain't cutting all them parish properties, I can tell you that.
Mark, I'll tell you, when I was on the LNT board, we paid $30 million a year for the grass and maintenance contract to maintain all those properties we took back from the state. Absurd. I mean, it's ridiculous what went on with it. We can't afford that. We need to get rid of the properties, put them in somebody else's hands, and put conditions in these things that these people are going to maintain these properties if they get them. We're just not going to give them to them. They're going to be another vacant lot with grass 6 feet high on them. You don't want that next door to you. So that's those issues. But the properties that we own that are rentable, like the Coppice Building, there's a few of these out there, they need to be marketed. Not next year. We don't need to talk about it. You mentioned earlier, before the meeting started, that LNG people are talking about maybe leasing some space in the building. Global event. Why don't we just master lease the whole building to them, let them sublease it? We don't have to fool with it. Let them. We don't need to get into the rental business. We don't need to get in the property management business. There's professionals that do that. We don't have anybody in the parish that does that. And no reflection on all you got. It's hard to get the council to make their minds up and agree upon everything 5-4 1 week, the next week 4-5. Nobody wants to come and try to deal with the parish. There's no set goals. You need to sit down with somebody across the table, negotiate a fair price on these things, and offer the property for rent. Now, I don't know how much space we need, but right now I can tell you Global Venture and all their sub companies, they're scurrying around looking for office space right now. Small buildings, instead of wherever they can do business. You've seen some of the stuff, they even rent a bar room. They go to put their little offices up next to the Exxon station. So that could be due to it, but somebody needs to be there physically and sit down face to face with somebody. The port's not going to do it. The parish administration is not doing it from that standpoint. As far as the properties, and like you all talked about the tomato shed and all those properties like that, you all both know I was in the real estate business. I was in the banking business. I ran a real estate department. Those properties, and I taught appraisal for Tulane over here. They know that. I can tell you those are prime properties. Some point in time in the future, that site is going to be a gold mine. I don't think we need to do anything with it. I think we need to sit back and wait, clean it up, get rid of it to the point of maintenance on the property. We cut all our expenses down and do the least that we can to maintain the property so that they don't deteriorate any further than where they are today. Okay? It goes the same way with Port Eads, which is a whole different ballgame. Marketing Port Eads, and again, I know you all spent $15-16 million to fix this place up, and FEMA did back there. It has limited uses. It is primary use, I think, for some type of governmental agency that has deep pockets that can support it and run it. Parish can't. I don't know anybody down here. A fishing village, great idea. Not going to give you any money. Not going to get any return on it. Your best bet on that aspect of it is to sell that piece of property at some point in time. Who can buy it? You got to find somebody with governmental agency with deep pockets, or go to Washington. You know, one time we talked with Duffy, with the I'm trying to think what's the name of this company. It's a Big River Coalition. They had money. They were talking about had some interest in it. You had the deep water people and everything up and down the river. It is a prime, beautiful facility, limited usage. It isn't one that I think you need to put on the front burner. You put it on the back burner. It's attack the low-hanging fruit that you got out there. But I think you need to get a copy of all the properties the parish owns. If there's any leases on them, when those leases are up, whether or not those leases meet a fair market valuation of what they're being leased at, and get the revenue back up to what it should be. There's enough disputes from the Venice all the way up to to the government complex, what's there. But as far as selling properties, I wouldn't get cranked up about that. It's the worst thing you can do. You don't sell a piece of property you own next door to your lot just because you don't need it right now. You may need it in the future. It's hard to replace a piece of property. We missed our deal on that Edward property right there. Could have bought it for $300,000 for the state. Everybody was asleep at the wheel, okay?
It was brought up, but
You weren't asleep. You and I, we all talked about it. I went and bid on the property just so we could probably have it in the parish's possession. It's gone now.
yep.
And there's other properties going to be coming up in the future. I don't think we ought to let them go. But I think everything we do ought to be by bid, so the public sees the transparency of what we're doing and the honesty of what we're doing. And it ought to be by appraisal. I mean, you guys,
Oh, we agree with that.
you do that all the time. It's nothing new. But I wouldn't get carried away with a broad, one brush covers everything here. We have identified the specifics. You got the properties that you have for foreclosure. You got the properties you got back from the state. You know, you got the properties that we own. Some things can be just put on a shelf, kept for future use. But I wouldn't sell anything. Always crank up, sell a Povich building for what? Don't need, it's not enough money that's going to come in to affect the budget or what's going to happen with it. And if, what I've seen, if the parish administration gets the money, here comes another quadplex. Okay? And we don't need another quadplex.
From the prices they talked about selling that and made a shed for, you could buy a house in the parks. And, you know,
I can tell you, I mean, there's enough prudent developers around in the parish and in South Louisiana that could ideally come in and suggest things for the parish to do with that piece of property, highest and best use. I can tell you, I mean, that's a prime riverfront property, biggest square piece of property. You got adjacent things. Find the ferries there, so what? You're probably going to end up moving a ferry before it's all over with somewhere. Not this year, but in 10 years. You know, what have you all seen when you all look at these properties?
Well,
Long-term growth.
we certainly agree with you that the area around the tomato shed is very valuable. And I think the parish has the opportunity to leverage the Croatian community center that they're building there as an anchor of that. One of the things that we would like to recommend is the parish consider a river district that includes those properties all the way to the yeast plant. So in fact, if you don't mind, I'll share this. This is just a map that we created that
we own up to the yeast plant.
Thank you.
Let me get one to her. Oh, wait, she's doing it.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have some multiple copies. You know, it's very rare that you have properties assembled already. So when you look at the properties that the parish owns in that area, as well as you look at the folks who own the yeast plant that also own the properties adjacent, all the way to the upriver, where it makes the point. Now,
Same
we have,
person owns them properties?
yeah, one person, one family that owns, the same family that owns the yeast plant. Now, we've had no discussions with them, and I know it's been talked about over the years as the yeast plant as a development opportunity. The thinking is to look at that entire area as a whole, where it's not just the parish-owned properties, because you're anchored by the new Croatian facility, and that would be upriver. No, it would be downriver by the yeast plant. So right at the end, I think that street. I believe that street is.
It's Main Street. That's
Well, it's not
Main.
Main. Main Street goes in. I'm talking about the street that goes I guess just past Mississippi Riverbank. It's on the map. The what? It's really where Avenue A kind of and.
Bell Chase Avenue.
Yeah, Bell Chase Avenue, that's it, Bell Chase Avenue. So, and this was just this is basically just lines on the map, but in terms of creating value, This is, we agree that we think that that area has tremendous potential for development. Now, having said that, one of the challenges, of course, is consolidation. So, the sheriff, court, clerk of court, if you had to move those folks to make those properties available, where would you move them to? There are essentially very few. You have plenty buildings in the government complex, but no buildings that are available currently that are not renovated. So I think if we're going to create value in that area long term, I think I would suggest we look at a plan of consolidation. So I would assume that it's the council's goal, as well as the administration, to consolidate all parish offices in the complex. So if that were to happen, then we would have to identify which buildings would be available for development, A, and B, how do you underwrite the renovation of those buildings?
Those are all nice, but where's the money come from?
Well, I'm posing that question. I'm saying if we're going to look at this whole real estate topic strategically, I agree we need to take a look at
Strategically, I know you and I have talked about this before. Ideally, when you talk about the tomato shed and all the rest of it, you incorporate the high school in it. And the high school is a prime piece of property. And the high school should be moved somewhere else. It's a congestion problem for the traffic in the area, for the people, the usage of it. The population is changing from that demographics of what's there. That is one of the prime pieces. So if you combine the high school property with the tomato shed piece of property and you create this district, as you've talked about for some time about that with the Coalition Center and all, you got a prime piece of property 10 years from now.
Yeah, well,
It's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah.
It's a long-term plan.
I mean, I don't, we're certainly not recommending including the high school.
I'm sorry, Mark, I didn't.
That's a long-term, certainly long-term, but our recommendation was everything's on the other side of Belle Chase Highway, in that general area that has that's consistent with future development. Because you have from the Peabody property, their office, and the Yeast Plant and the Star, and I mean, very rarely do you find that kind of property available on the riverfront for development. So, I mean, that technically could become a new retail mixed-use center that you see in a lot of communities across not only Louisiana, but the U.S.
Before you get into that, though, you got the situation you got to look at. And again, this goes back when I was in the banking business. Developers don't talk to each other. There might be one corner piece of property on the highway, they're talking about a shopping center. Same developer, another developer's talking about the other corner of the piece of property. There's no communications. We're sitting here facing Peavash that acquired that major piece of property on Woodland and Belle Chase Highway 23, that he's never really announced his plans of what he's supposed to do there. We looked at it at one time, trying to put together a retail, commercial, and residential on that site with office space. It's a good mixed-use facilities. It's a prime location. All that, until that's announced what's going on, you don't know what you can do with the other piece of property. So it's a timing situation. You're 3 to 5 years out minimum before thinking about what to do with the tomato shed property. Again, it goes back to the highest and best use.
If you talking about making this whole outline piece like a river frontage,
Right.
do we buy the property or?
No. It's basically, it's all about just creating identity. And those are just lines on a map. You can do a lot of things with a district if you use enabling legislation through the state. So but I'm not suggesting we go that far. All I'm suggesting is that area has real value, and it's just, I would like to consider that just as a study area initially before we recommend anything. And I think the first thing, gentlemen, I think we need to figure out is your priorities. What do you want to do first? I mean, because the council controls all the properties. And is it consolidation? Is it the Popich building? Is it Port Eads? I mean, we just need some guidance in terms of how you would like to proceed, and we will go in that direction. There's a lot on the table. We threw a lot on the table this morning, And that was, this is one of the reasons why we recommended a real estate committee of the council, because we really need to get into some more in-depth discussion about the complex and all the rest of the things that are on the list that we discussed this morning. Because we're at a point now where we're ready to move, but we just need some guidance on which direction you would like to go in.
I admit, for the public, if you had to go to one spot to do anything with the parish, it'd be better than coming here, going over there, and then.
Right, oh, no question, there's no question.
But if we made that river district, would that, to the landowners, does it give them breaks on property tax?
No, not
or
initially,
anything like
no,
that?
not initially. I mean, there are ways to do it, and it would probably require a little, some further discussion, because this could become what they call a TIF district, a tax increment financing district, which is because you have to generate, if you're going to generate income to develop that property, you have to generate sales tax. And to do sales tax, you have to do retail. So, I've seen some plans, some very old plans for the yeast plant as a mixed-use facility, apartments, retail, things like that. But, what you have there, particularly, I'm going to call it the Star facility, you build a senior complex there, vertical, not horizontal, but, you go up as opposed to out, or condominiums. I mean, people would move there. I mean, people kill for that vista, seeing that river every day when they look out their window. I'm not suggesting that would happen, but you got to plant the seed for that. And in order to plant the seed, you got to draw a line on a map and say, this could potentially be a river district. What do we do from that point forward? So there are ways to create incentives related to that, but today, we just wanted to get on the table that we think that's a very valuable assemblage of property that the parish owns, and in cooperation with what the Croatian community is doing there and what could potentially happen with the yeast plant and the available properties on the other side of I'm going to call it the tomatoes. What do you call it, that whole assemblage? What do y'all call it?
The tomato shed,
Okay.
next building.
Okay, so, to upriver from the tomato shed, you've got, some large parcels of land, interestingly enough, which is controlled by one family. So that, I'm not saying that they would sell or they would develop, and I have not had any discussion with them, and I certainly can't talk for them. All I'm saying is that area has some potential. But in order for to unlock or unleash that potential, we have got to move those parish facilities that are in those buildings somewhere, and that movement costs money. So that leads us into discussion of what you want to do with the complex. I mean, do we use existing buildings for that consolidation to occur? Or is it more beneficial or economical to build a building to consolidate? So I'm not saying build a building, I'm just,
A couple of the buildings were gutted and roofs done, maybe.
I know, I'm not sure about the roof, even the one that they used for the filming. I know they did some stuff on the inside, but I don't know what happened on the roofs, and haven't been in the loop with that stuff.
Because I know we have one building over here, it's raised where you could back an 18-wheel up
Right,
and
right.
load out.
right. It's got,
Right now, we're renting a building to house records. And that building's air-conditioned, it's raised, and we storing garbage cans and water meters.
wow.
And we paying at least $75,000 to store records.
Jeez.
And I think we ought to look into moving that. I think we ought to, the buildings on Avenue A, could we lease one to Lalaya or that group? It's a group of children that do like painting and arts and all.
Yeah, that's entirely possible. I mean, Councilman, it's really I think we've reached a point where, as I said earlier, you guys have to decide what you want. and then we'll take it from there. But I think at the very least, we need to evaluate, or at least get someone to evaluate the government complex in terms of what will it be when it grows up. I mean, obviously, you could certainly add more sports facilities. You can certainly add more things related to entertainment. But if you want the pieces that you're talking about, retail, hotel, things like that, you have to plan for it. And currently, there is no, my understanding is no official survey, like a land survey of the complex property. At least I have not been able to find one, or I don't think there's one that exists. And then take a look at the inventory of buildings like the one you just mentioned, and identify 4 or 5 buildings that could potentially house any of the government entities that are in the tomato shed area and things like that.
I know we gave 2 to the sheriff's office.
Right.
They're gonna move out of that one over there.
Right. Yeah, the tomato shed building is actually the biggest building I think that's probably 20,000 square feet. That's a huge building. So, and all those buildings are in good shape. I mean, they're all, none of them are in bad shape. So it's just a lot to do. And then I think you had mentioned earlier that there were 4 or 5 other properties that people had asked to try to buy.
Down in Buras and Empire.
Right. So we'll just need to get some addresses and things like that. One of the things that we had recommended to the administration, and I would certainly recommend it to the council, is to create a real estate development fund, just a line item in the budget somewhere. So if any of the revenues that from leases would go specifically in that particular fund, and that fund would be dedicated to the consolidation. So moving parish offices into the complex. So it's specific. So if we generate funds from anywhere, and one of the easiest and quickest way, and I had this discussion with Rennie, is there's probably about 200 adjudicated properties that the parish owns, exclusive of Bohemia Spillway, because that's a separate issue unto itself. I had asked Rennie if he would consider talking to one of the title companies up Belchase Highway to look at the titles of these properties to find out where they are in the redemption process. Because if you're adjudicated, you have 3 years to redeem your taxes and your property. Beyond that, then you own it and it's free and clear. It's not a title impediment at that point. But I think that could be a reasonably quick way to generate some monies. I'm not sure how much, but some, because we really hadn't looked at the list of properties. And you mentioned Civic Source. We have worked with Civic Source before, and that's an entity that the City of New Orleans uses. The City of New Orleans uses, and I know Rennie had talked to an agency in Monroe that also does auctions related to adjudicated properties. So, I mean, there's a lot we can do here.
I wanted to talk to Rennie about something like that. When the parish puts up the properties that's delinquent on taxes,
Right.
and anybody could go pay the taxes.
That's correct.
And for 3 years, then they become owner.
That's right. That's right.
Is there a way to stop that? It all comes back to the parish.
Well, that's a legal question.
That's why I needed to talk to Rennie, because, if it comes back to the parish and them people, somebody does want to buy that piece of property, you come buy it from us.
Right. Well, that's the whole idea. And the company that he was talking about, Civic Source, is an auction company that specifically works with cities, municipalities, parishes, counties across the country, where if you've got, 30, 40 properties that you want to dispose or sell, that, or as you were saying earlier, that would be the manner in which you do it, because you have to auction these properties anyway, so they handle all factors and
It keeps it arm's length.
well, yeah, it definitely keeps it arm's length. So it's certainly something to look at. So what I was hoping to do this morning, and just put everything on the table, and it's clearly we got a lot more discussion that needs to take place. But I think there's some serious opportunity here for us to do, for you guys to do some good things for the complex, for the and for the parish, but it's just going to take some guidance.
Mark,
Let the record show John Bartholomew is present now, and
you know,
can you do a, not today, but for the next meeting, do an ordinance where all the sale or rental of parish property goes into a real estate fund?
one of the things that we've all looked at before, and again, you bring in expertise. I think we're at a stage, once we identify what properties that the parish has, and basically what the parish might want to utilize in some form of fashion, then we need to bring in the experts, professionals in the real estate fields to talk about how we market, what the land use is, where we go with things and stuff. It's just like the tomato shed. I mean, one of the things we've talked about beforehand is selling it to the port. Two reasons. One, port's got cash, can buy, but use that cash to move people other places.
What don't have cash?
I'm sorry?
What don't have cash?
It's coming. It's coming. Not now, but maybe in the future. But what it does have is abilities, if it owns the property, to be a catalyst in a development picture of one facility that can offer bond programs, incentives of financing for these things in the long term, a bigger picture. That then could be a catalyst to other stuff up and down the river adjacent to the properties. But again, what he talks about with the district, it fits in a bigger picture, long term. But it takes a lot of discussion about this. This is not something overnight. I mean, you're talking about years of discussion with professional people. Again, identify and get rid of the stuff you can get rid of quickly. Don't waste your time spending money on stuff. It's not going to bring you any money, like the Eads building, the Eads complex. In the standpoint there, get some revenue in. I mean, I've heard Benny talk about, rent these buildings we've got. Let's do something with them, market them. Somebody market the buildings. And I have not seen anybody marketing these buildings anyway. I'm going to sit down enough.
But another legal question, if we do sell Port Ease, does FEMA get their money back?
The who?
FEMA.
FEMA. I don't know. That's a tricky question. And we did not come here recommending the sale of Port
I'm
Eads.
just asking,
Yeah.
I'm just stating, if we did,
That's a Rennie question, and I can certainly pose the question to Rennie, but, our notion was we've got three operators, charter operators that are interested in leasing the building, so.
maybe next committee meeting, we could have them come in and give a presentation on what they want to do, or
Well, what you do is you do essentially a formal RFP process. So not necessarily to lease, but the RFP will generate what they're considering for the building, and then you can evaluate of those who are interested in doing something with the building, which one has the best use and can generate the most amount of revenue for the parish. So I'm not sure I could get them in here to tell you what they want to do, but I can certainly get them to put something in writing that this is what we're thinking and this is what we want. So that's the first step in a discussion about what could happen with the Port Eads building. And then, Carlton, to your point, we'll see what we can do about contacting governmental agencies that may have an interest, research interest in looking at that facility. I'm thinking the one in Lafayette, I think it's called LumpCon, which is a research facility. And just look at what Baton Rouge did with their facility along the river, right underneath the bridge. The Mississippi River Bridge. And if you can tie into anything coastal research, that would be very, very helpful.
them or Noah. Noah's out there with boats every day.
Right. And then that's, at that level, that might be something we should speak to the congressman about.
The Wildlife and Fisheries has camps down.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they could make that there.
I can certainly put in a call to Troy Carter and see if any of his staff people could do some analysis to see if there are any potential agencies that might be interested in looking at a facility like that. And then, to two Carters, Gary Carter, your senator, about maybe the next session of the legislature could provide some funds that might provide study funds for complex, for River District, for Port Eads, things like that. So something to consider.
All right.
Rob Forshey. I'm sure we're all aware that at Port Eads, we're not the only owner of the property down there, right? I mean, the lighthouse, and there's some dock work that is owned by the state, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't know
Corps
about
has-
the state, but.
The Corps is also involved.
Okay, so,
I had a buyer for the lighthouse, but
well, unfortunately, we're going to need to deal with that. But you know, I'm not sure that sale is the right thing. I think that with the right vision and the right people getting on top of this thing, that this could be an asset for the parish, and it could definitely be. I mean, look, we've already spent $15 million, and whether or not you want to count the FEMA money, the parish's money or not, it is the parish's money because it was tax money that was utilized through FEMA to buy it. So, with that being said, it is all the citizens' property, and I think that because it is a facility that can be utilized and can be leased, and to the right people, we could make money. There could be money that could support other entities and properties here in the parish that we own, and that we desperately need help maintaining and developing. So I just wanted to make that statement publicly because there's a lot of people out there that don't realize that the state and Wildlife and Fisheries and the Corps of Engineers or whoever has got their finger in parcels around and including pieces of that pie. So I'll yield with that.
Good point.
Hold up 1 minute, Mr. John.
I'm
There
sorry.
you go.
All right, since it's in District 1, I think we need to do a comprehensive analysis of the facility. And we know we do a lot of investment in tourism.
You talking about Port Eads?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, okay.
And the fisheries, the sporting people in fishery, that's a big opportunity because they may develop something to do that. That's an ongoing process, ongoing business, and it generates a lot of money. People make millions of dollars a year on stuff like that. But we have to set it up and put it in a posture to make it available
Correct.
for that purpose. See, and we need to be global when we're talking about this piece of property and what is the best scenario possible to maintain the quality of the structure and the impact, economic impact to the parish as the years goes on. So what's going to be that constant? Fishing will always be there.
Right.
No matter what. It's going to be there.
they don't.
Count-
Diversion, I mean not diversion, real estate with the marsh, creation of marsh properties, people that's into that kind of action, that's going to always be there. What you saying, Mr. Chairman?
That's the only spot in America you could have 3-day limit and come in with.
Yeah.
Well,
But still-
Councilman, before you came to the meeting, I was telling the two councilmen that we have 3 unsolicited calls from fishing charter operators, including the one who was there before. And of the 3, 1 is global. I mean, they're all over the world, and their specialty is fly fishing. And they are, I mean, he calls almost monthly now. I agree with you. It needs to be positioned either as a charter operation or as a research facility. But I think it's going to take.
That's enough room for all that to take.
Oh, but you have each building is about 3,000 square feet. So you got about 6,000 square feet within the 2 buildings.
You got the 2 in the back.
Right.
You have enough space to accommodate all 3 components.
But, and I had suggested that maybe someone from the parish engineer's office could go down there and do a quick assessment of what it would take to repair the facility and make it available. That was one approach. The second approach was to offer the facility through a bid process, of course, as is. And whoever the operator would be would then do all the repairs to the facility. Because the buildings are in good shape, but they've been anything on the exterior has been stripped. There's no two ways about it. So, but on the inside, the kitchen equipment is still there. It's like they just walked out and shut the door.
Like I said, that one group went down there and cleaned everything.
Right. It's actually in good shape. But I agree with you, Councilman.
And the other thing is that we need to identify all the lands that is owned by Plaquemine Parish in that region, not assuming, identify
Right.
specifically what we own and what we don't own. Because we're all assuming now. We don't know for sure. So, but we need to get somebody to do an assessment, comprehensive assessment or forensic assessment, whatever you want to call it,
Right.
to utilize and identify the property that's around there and who it belongs to.
The map I seen with the
You know?
Coast Guard, they own the lighthouse.
Right.
They own one walkway across the dock, getting to the pass. And the
Well-
rest was parish.
Well,
I don't know about that. You saw it, that's fine, but the idea, we still need to do that comprehensive thing.
we could,
All components, that way we'd be ideal, we'd be straight on what it is that we are in control of. And the other parties that's involved, then we may have to do some negotiating with them to, if it's a part that we would need to have in with the selling or the rental of police to accommodate the residents of that particular sale or commitment of rental, whatever it may be.
Sure.
To make it really work.
well, we could go on and on and on, but I would like to maybe suggest a course of action here. I think to your point, I think the first thing we need to do is to get a list of all parish-owned properties. Now, some of that may or may not require the forensics that you're talking about, but I think generally there's a list somewhere that we can take a look at. And I think from that list, the real estate committee makes a determination of what should or could be surplus. And that would be the pool of properties that we would start with. That would be the first thing. Second thing, maybe a resolution on behalf of the council that would just recommend studying the idea of a river district. Just so that it's out there and you start the process to at least start looking at what could that be. I think you already, Mark, you had already mentioned that you wanted to set up a Plaquemine Parish Real Estate Development Fund. Any proceeds from any lease or sale of a property would go into that primarily for the purpose of underwriting or financing or funding consolidation of any parish entity in any of the buildings outside of the complex into the complex. And then lastly, I think a resolution directing Rennie to the parish attorney's office to take a look at how we could proceed with the sale of adjudicated properties that have passed the redemption period, and to engage a title attorney that can start looking at the roughly 200 properties that exist, it's adjudicated properties that exist within the parish. And I think that would be a good start to that. And then lastly would be just at some point I'd like to get Tulane back into the picture mainly because it may be free, so to speak, but we may need some money just to underwrite the study. But we need to take a look at, I think, what are the potential future uses for the land associated with and in the parish complex period. So that's a lot.
Well, we starting on it, and
Yeah. And I'll work with you if you want and to further clarify some of this if need be. But I think that would be a good start. And then we could, you decide what's the highest priority in terms of what you want to work on first. And, my thinking is whatever can generate the most amount of funds first, and it might very well be those adjudicated properties. So,
All right, well, we'll get together, talk amongst ourselves, see what we want to do, and
sure.
we'll have an agenda for next meeting, and hopefully all council members can come that's on the board.
Sure. Whatever we can do to help. I mean, you have my cell phone number, so just give me a holler if anything you need from me or us, and we're happy to provide it.
Thank you. Any other comments? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So often.
Motion by Mr. LaFrance, second by Mr. Bartholomew. Any questions? Machine's open. And let the record show we adjourned at 10:18 a.m.